and welcome to the Chronicles of Nania, a nanny resource podcast made for nannies by me, a nanny. I am your host, Martha Reddick, and this week we are going to be talking about a very exciting new book written by Alex Hiam. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Martha. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. The book is called Silent Lee and the Adventures of the Side Door Key. And it talks about adoption and children who have been adopted and are searching for answers about their past, right?
That is a theme, yeah, a strong theme in it, along with a sprinkling of magic and some other adventures.
Oh, I love it. Well, great. Before we talk about that, let's hear a little bit about your background and what led you to write this book.
Well, I guess number one, lots of children, right? And I'm currently raising with my wife, Deirdre, two girls, 9 and 14. And when I started writing, they were respectively a couple years younger. Mm-hmm. So my lead character, Silent, is 15. So you tend to sort of read, I think, or write a couple of years up from the kids, and as long as you keep the adventures appropriate, they like that. Aspirational, right?
Yes.
And I actually have 5 kids in all. I had some children when I was just out of college. And so I've read out loud a huge number of books to kids, and I've written quite a few. And I don't know if you want me to talk about my own family background and being adopted.
Yeah, I would love that.
Well, my family was constructed, I guess you might say. We were all adopted, 4 of us, in about 3 years. So we're quite close. And I have a twin brother who was adopted with me, which is nice when parents are willing to do that. I gather it was a surprise. They didn't do what do you call those imaging techniques? They can back then. So I didn't know that until rather late in the game that my parents' first adoption was going to be two baby boys.
Wow.
Yeah, I gather there was a lot of scrambling to get an extra crib and take
double everything.
Yeah. But in those days, adoptions were sealed, so it was this interesting mystery, where you're from, and although we had a good family that brought us up, I'm always curious, and I did some research later and recently in my life. So, this mystery about adoption is a theme I realize is in a number of the stories I write for kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other thing I think of perhaps germane to your audience or and a lot of my readers is that. Just by happenstance, I'm from I guess call it white family, from Boston, but I'm now been married for, I should know this, 12 years to my wife, and her family's African American, and she grew up all around the place because her dad was in the Air Force. But so we have these girls who are looking for characters they can identify with in stories, and so I wrote Silent Lee as like my older daughter Sadie as a mixed race girl who presents as African American, and people ask her wonder who she is sometimes, and so there's some of these identity issues that we often have to help our kids with. I think it's interesting and fun to weave them into stories in sort of positive ways.
Yes, I completely agree. So if a nanny is working with a family who has adopted children, what advice would you give to the nanny to help support that child through, it can be a journey of finding out and coming into knowing that you're adopted, and then the journey of, well, where did I come from?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So, I have the perspective of having grown up in a family where, my parents were advised, I think, it was just coming into vogue, the idea that you don't keep it as like a, quote, dirty secret, but that it's presented as a positive thing and just a fact. And you tell your kids, we adopted you as they're growing up. So there isn't a sudden, discovery. Right. Oh, my God, I was adopted. Why didn't you tell me? Were you ashamed? What is it? So, but I think you have to talk with the parents about that and say, so, yeah, how do you talk to your child about this? Do they know they're adopted? Do they know is it open adoption? Do they know who their birth parents are? Do you know, how much, what's the fact base that I work with here? Then I
Right.
think it's good to be just sort of matter of fact about it, and everybody comes from somewhere, and yet there's a wonderful diversity of, origins for us all, and there's such variety in families, both of the kids and the parents and the combinations, and so sort of put it into that wonderful sort of patchwork quilt of humanity. But yeah, I'm also, as it turns out, I didn't really mention this in my background, but this theme comes up for my older daughter Sadie and I, because she's been with her mom, who was her birth mom, and but she was a little teeny 1.5-year old when I first fell in love with her mom, and so I've raised her since about 2, and I did adopt her, which is a wonderful thing, and yet, she's, so it's a bit unusual. She was adopted by one of her parents,
Right.
but I'm sure some of your listeners are going to walk into families like that, and could be from, the rearrangements that happen in life. And
Yes.
so she and I talk about it, and I will say you're going to get, kids will sort of glom onto anything, or even use anything that's sort of a lever, when they're upset. So sometimes she used to shout at me when she was mad, "You can't tell me what to do. You're not even my real daddy."
Oh, yes.
And I think it's good to have a nice, positive, warm and fuzzy answer. You can, if you're prepped for those sorts of challenges, like uh, you know, um, you know, you know, I am your daddy. I adopted you, and I love you very much. And that's what makes you your dad. It makes me your daddy. There's more than one way to be a daddy or to get a daddy, and and a hug.
Yes, yes, definitely that
Really
connection
what
is
it's
super
about.
important in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And we have a very close relationship. It matters not that she's adopted, although it makes her a good editor for my work in more than one way, because she does love to read my work or have me read a draft chapter out loud and give me feedback.
oh,
So
that's wonderful.
so she and I have both talked about silently in her background. Yeah.
Yeah, and is Silently somewhat based on her?
Yeah, I quite strongly. Even down to sort of having her sort of tween attitude. She's she kind of can come on strong in ways that I think are great. Because like a lot of, I don't get too much into the story right now, but like a lot of I think sort of heroes in these middle school to YA stories. There are problems that the adults have either caused or aren't solving, and the kids have to step forward.
Hmm.
Which is really what a lot of the storytelling is all about. It's kind of helping them come of age, I guess, through these stories and role models. But anyway, so I think giving Silently a lot of Sadie's sort of attitude and and independence has been great. Yeah.
Yes, and I think, in the 80s, especially in movies and TV, there was just the parents just weren't around.
Yeah.
And that was kind of their way of dealing with that. But I have found, because I read quite a bit of young adult fiction, I kind of do book clubs with my older nanny kids. Or not even book clubs, just they say, "Will you read this?" Because my parents won't, or my other friends aren't
Yeah.
interested.
I'll talk to you about it. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and I have found that now it's less that the parents are just absent, and there are these other obstacles that come up with the parents being there for children in the various ways that they need to present these obstacles, or the parents are super supportive. There's also that. Whereas
Yeah.
sometimes the parents are so supportive that the kids are like, wait, let me figure it out.
Yeah, I love you so much. I'm just going to smother you with attention, tell
Yes.
you how to be successful just like me. Yeah. Well, those are, I mean, I think the stories are getting maybe a little more realistic. Even if they're fantasy, the challenges and the interpersonal stuff may ring true, or maybe an exaggerated version of what you got to deal with in your own family as a kid coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it sounds like you are a really involved and an active father, but in some of these, especially older stories and culturally, there is this stereotype of the distant or non-involved father, and I do think that that's shifting culturally. But have you found that to be challenging as a father to work against those stereotypes?
Yeah, I think it is. And as a writer,
Yeah.
and oh, I will just say, Silent Lee does not ever, in the first book, find out who her dad is. I have a plan, and she's going to meet him. And it turns out he was actually being helpful at somewhat of a distance, but he doesn't know that he's her father. So I have kind of reproduced that distant parents thing. And her mother betrays her, her adoptive mother. She discovers at the end of the book it wasn't really her mother.
Oh,
So I
wow.
have a kind of a fun secret that actually perhaps the great aunt who's raising her, because it does involve time travel back a century and stuff, might be more of a central in her life than she even realizes, just to put a bit of a teaser out there for this
Yeah.
second book. But so she's a kind of an example of a girl who's got one very supportive, close, loving figure in her life who raises her, who's her great aunt Generous. And I have got a quirky sense of humor. I guess it's dad humor, but so everyone in that family, their last name is Lee. They have this way of the names turn into adjectives. So you have silently, or adverbs, I guess, silently, generously,
Oh,
and
that's
some other
great.
relatives, cousins that get mentioned. It's I think it's great to have chuckles with the kids as you're reading with them too. But no, I don't. I haven't really put a dad like myself in. I'm very hands on as a parent,
Yeah.
so I don't know why not. I guess just like I think the author should step back, and not put him be all about himself when you write these books for kids. So maybe
Right.
that's why. Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you have any advice for caregivers or nannies to help support that father's involvement in his children's lives?
I guess one thing that's hard for kids is to understand that everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and it's easy, especially if the kids get a little older and getting into like the reading range for this book. Sort of they love good stories. You might read this out loud at like 7, 8, 9, and they might be reading it at 9, 10 through 14.
Right.
So in those years they may be annoyed with their parents, but I think the caregiver can ask, can think about and observe and ask, questions that focus on, the strengths the parents have. Like, so I also do illustrations. So with my younger 9-year-old, just before I came to do this interview, I was helping her get the drawing of a face right that she wanted, which was quite frustrating. But I can do that because it's something that I'm good at. And then and she wouldn't go to her mom for that. She'd go to me because she knows that I'm an artist. I try to share that with her, bring her to my
Right.
stuff. And with my older daughter, I taught a writing class for her, and at her she was homeschooled this last year, but we used a center that that runs classes 4 days a week,
Mm.
and so I actually went on staff there to teach creative writing for the year because she said, "Can you teach me plotting? I'm struggling with how you develop the plots and finish a story." I said, "How about I do it through North Star Center? Not just one on one because that's sort of hard at that age." So we had a wonderful time, and she ended up kind of being my facilitator, and and letting me know when I was droning on too long and we should get on to the next activity. Yeah. But so I'm a long way of answering, but I feel like for me as a dad, the things that I can bring to the table and share with them that they might initially not want to like look to me as being helpful on something because what do your parents know? But if you're
Right.
good at something and have some experience with it, do find a way to share that as an activity. Take them kayaking, not on the whitewater, but
Right.
where if that's what you do, or rebuild a bike, or whatever it is the dad loves, and then also just as a dad, I got to say, I've got 2 daughters. I don't need as much talking about feelings and hugging as my girls do.
Right.
So I can forget that I should just do that. And like when they're crying and have a problem, I don't need to tell them, what to do. I can just sort of be a sympathetic listener. This is the men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing, right? Yeah. But I think we can all help dads remember that with their kids. Kids just
Yeah.
sympathy.
And I've also noticed, even, with myself, that sometimes just when I'm talking, I tend to use female pronouns when talking about caregiving. And so just something as simple as switching that to male pronouns sometimes when you're talking about a general idea of
Yeah.
caregiving.
Well, the pronouns thing is fascinating, and the assumptions we make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, my daughter Sadie keeps telling me to use they or to the gender neutral pronouns if I'm not sure or if there's no reason to make a gender out of it, trying to retrain me. And I think that's been so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's a good thing to retrain your brain. But it's
Yeah.
hard. It takes a lot of work, and we also have to be gentle and kind with ourselves, because when you're retraining your brain, it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and which is perhaps a nice reminder that growing up is a lot of hard work, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, kids are constantly
Yeah.
um, putting things in different under different microscopes and filters and looking at them differently. So, yeah, keeping in mind that they're pretty consistently doing that hard work of trying to make sense of the world and to challenge our own stereotypes and habits, I think is a really good thing. Um,
Yeah, I guess putting that out there and doing it on your sleeve and not hiding it. Yeah, just if you're role modeling how you're still learning and correcting and or improving your reactions. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, speaking of, you created really strong non-traditional female protagonists in your books.
Mhm.
So, what can a caregiver do in everyday life to help encourage young women, especially, but really all kids, to be strong and celebrate their differences rather than seeing that as a minus?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's interesting to think about the way that characters develop in books. In a good book, you don't say, you wouldn't say open up and saying silently is a strong character. That's going to be discovered through how she reacts. She's going to be given some sort of adversity, put into a crisis or just a small problem or whatever. But and I love how the feedback I get from Sadie and her compatriots in the writing class and other kids who I read to at schools or whatever, they love those scenes where the character or main characters are facing a challenge. And at first it's not clear how to do it. But we have them take a constructive approach and determined approach and they keep trying till they get it. So, really that just tells us how all character is developed, not just in novels. So, I think everyone should have family should have a nanny because they may have the time to focus on the kid more sometimes than the busy parent who's rushing home from work to make dinner, or
Yes.
whatever. Yes. And so you can think, what good challenge could this child be facing today? Maybe they, are ready to try to make, whatever chocolate chip banana muffins off of an internet recipe. It's a
Yeah.
pretty big challenge, and it even has serious hazards. Are they going to take the mitts and they're old enough to pick up the pan and put it in the hot oven, or do you want to help them? How do you define the limits of the challenge? It's a good experience. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's how I would think about it, just like an author does in developing a character.
Right. And I think that that's an excellent reminder of making choices as a nanny to let the kids try and potentially fail at something. I always tell my kids they can say it back to me verbatim. What's my number one job is to keep them safe. But within that, I think that, yeah, letting them, maybe the muffins don't turn out well because they skipped the sugar step, or I don't think that's the step they would skip, but or
Well,
the banana step, like that would be a pretty big thing to
or they put
miss.
in the amount of baking soda that should have been sugar. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Measurements were incorrect, and letting them experience those natural, pretty low stakes in the grand scheme of thing consequences, I think is really important, because it does help build that character of, okay, these muffins don't taste great. What are we gonna do about that?
Yeah, and maybe you have the foresight to have had to make a half recipe and save, the other half of the ingredients off to the side, and if you have the time, and then because they're going to now be motivated to find out, like, what went wrong.
Right.
It's nice to end with a success, or maybe they're old enough that can say, let's do that again, the next week when you have a half day from school, and get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if it's now summer break for most kids, so you have those long days, and what better than to fill them with time to fix mistakes and or experiment and see where the day takes you.
As you say that, I get to thinking that most schools and teachers aren't really able to sort of tolerate a lot of failure.
Right.
Failure is bad there. So it would be nice to flip that over and go, let's sort of bungle our way through summer, getting better through experience, and laughing about it as we go. And, yeah, I mean, that's not bad. Even like letting, if you're going on a little trip somewhere and put the kid in charge of the GPS if you're in the car, or, and then give them directions and your kids too, and that huge variable, are they tired and or hungry, but if they're in resilient and physiologically in like an up cycle right now, then it's a great time to let them like get you a little lost and then help them figure out how to get out of it or whatever.
Yeah, and that's something that my stepdad did for me, is at airports and things, we'd get there in plenty of time, and then he would say, okay, you find our gate. And
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and then I go to the map and look and find it, and it really served me well in life, because now that's not a big scary thing. And when I am maybe running late, I can do it more on autopilot now, because I've been doing it since I was 7 or whenever he started encouraging me to do
that's wonderful. And what an intimidating thing an airport is too. Yeah.
Right.
But to get there early enough that he's not uptight, so he can let you study the map. I mean, you probably can nail that the first time, if you're old enough to read a map, and or maybe a little bit of backseat driving. Did you notice that that there's terminals A through D, and they each have a gate 23.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then if they're missing that, rather than get all the way down the wrong terminal. But I think that's wonderful, and it's so empowering to just have those experiences where you do things rather than just follow instruction or follow behind like a duckling.
Right. And also to help, like we were talking about, changing our own biases and things like that. We often think of things like that as a chore, but to a child or children, it's can be so joyful. And so I think that taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I love that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm thinking with my author hat on again. Every problem that is silent in Rahi, the boy she meets down the block and who helps her out, encounter is certainly not a chore. It's an adventure, and that the idea that as a nanny you're often queuing up or helping them through adventures.
Right.
I mean, there has to be some downtime too,
Yes.
And
for all of our sake.
It's like, 9:30 at night when I wish my 9-year-old was already asleep, that I know they're pretty good, but they're a little slower paced, and I know she'll fall asleep on the second chapter. So, yeah.
Right.
But some adventure every day is so important, and that really is. I think the attitudes that we've had toward children and toward the children we've defined as girls in historically have shaped what adventures or lack of adventures we give them and what challenges, and that's why they feel limited when they get older, maybe, and so, you don't really need to, make any voice any political views about any of these matters when you're working with kids. You can just act them out, and that you give kids opportunities equally and as fully as they're able. Yeah, and always letting them know in little ways that you believe in them, that they can rise to challenges.
Yes. And I heard when you were talking about, I think the map and or the muffin examples,
Yeah.
the way that you said it of like, did you notice things like that? And even those shifts in our language of like, well, look at this, that's a little bit more condescending in tone uh, to did you notice? I think that's a beautiful way of pointing out. And I try on the playground and things to, instead of say just be careful, because that's non-directive and not all that helpful.
It just says that I don't trust you not to hurt yourself.
Exactly. But rather saying, did you notice that these rocks are really they can be hard to walk on and they have some sharp edges. What's your plan for that? So that they're thinking through it.
Study their environment and navigate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or this bush looks like a great hiding spot, and I would be tempted by it in hide and go seek. But did you notice these thorns? Things like that. I think is such a great way to help kids, slow down and notice their environment without lecturing or condescending to them. So I really appreciated your language there.
Yeah.
You really are a writer.
Yeah. Well, thinking about the words and the message, right? I mean, that's, I guess, I feel like, caregivers are writers too, sort of helping the kids write their own experiences. I was just thinking as you were talking that last night, I think, night before last, some neighbors had come down, and my 9-year-old's friend who's 9 and her 7-year-old or 6-year-old daughter, sister, and they were running all around in front of my little garden, and there was a big rose bush that I'm very proud of having gotten to grow there. Yeah. And so I did. So I was thinking, what do I say? Because I saw the little one chasing a ball almost to it. So then I thought, I'm going to ask her big sister, does she know what a rose bush is? And I got a why? I said, well, because she might not recognize it, and we don't want her to get cut up on it. So it's so she went and taught her little sister what the rose bush was. Oh. And it's well, that worked out better than my saying to some little girl who I hardly know and be intimidated, don't go near that bush. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great story to illustrate that point. And speaking of nannies, kind of helping write, almost co-author day-to-day living with children. You mentioned that you work with teens to help them write and make writing exciting at North Star.
That's right.
But so I love helping children develop a love for imagination and writing. What tips do you have for nannies who are working with, school-age children to help cultivate that love of writing and storytelling and imagination?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think is we discount as, adults and young adults is because we've kind of forgotten about it, is imaginative play and role play. So whether they're picking up some little dolls or little animals or characters or things, they're making into characters and having them interact or go through adventures, or whether they're doing it themselves, they could be talking about, cooking as they're moving things around in the playground or the sandbox. Right. They're often actually directly composing a story that they or their characters are in. So either they're the author or the director or they're an actor, and they're trying to navigate. You talked about before we started recording some of your background in improv theater. Kids do a lot of improv theater, and it can be difficult, and they may even argue about where it's going, which can be wonderfully constructive too. So I just think it's fun to tune your ear in and to help them, expand or or continue the play those imaginative stories they're already creating, or to enrich them a bit. So you might say, well, what if another animal joined in, or you found they're playing with animals and they're veterinarians. What if you found a sick fox? What would you do? Just to get them, just to help them enrich their imaginative play, and then and there's a lot of interesting research too, but in child development about the correlations between being engrossed in longer, more elaborate play like that, where they're writing their own plays, basically, taking them out, and later intelligence and success in school and life. So, unlike a lot of things that we try to measure, that really has a huge impact. Maybe more than when you first read and write. And a lot of things to do with school variables. So that's just wonderful, rich developmental play. Just the stuff of future, engaged, bright, successful, good problem solvers, who are going to be great adults and, solve all the problems that the past generations have left. Then the other thing, though, is to engage them in storytelling. I think it's great to do a sort of a give and take, stories, or to ask them questions. They say, tell me a story or read me a book. Sure, but what would you like? Who would you like the main character to be? Well, yeah, okay, so it's a family of chipmunks. Well, where do they live? And well, are they happy and everything great, or is something giving them a little worry right now? Oh, somebody's clearing the woods to build a new mall,
grocery store. Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you going to help them continue to be able to, they can't get nuts from the woods anymore. So maybe you help them think of sneaking in at night as the construction's going along, and putting secret tunnels into the cement slabs so they can get into the fruits and nuts department once it's done. Whatever it is, just interacting with them and challenging them to help compose stories. Storytelling is, the first and foremost way that, we share our knowledge and our imagination and our problem solving and our language and our, love of, love and, and values and things, with next generation. And, people have been doing it long before, the written word.
Right. Yeah. And there are a lot of, games geared towards that now, of like decks of cards that have just pictures on them, so you kind of go along and tell the story and then draw a card, and then you incorporate that card into the picture. Or there's a one that has a dice that has different story elements on it, so just if you are
words.
Yeah. If you're feeling as a nanny a little nervous about doing like a shared story or constructing a story, that might be a good way to get started with that sense of play. Because I know some, nannies, we've kept our sense of wonder and play, a lot of us, but there can be a feeling of intimidation around that, because it's really vulnerable work to construct a story with another human. So just be gentle with yourself if that makes you feel nervous. I encourage you to try it, and to model doing something that makes you a little uncomfortable, but also know that there are things that can help support you.
Oh, yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think I don't mind diving into storytelling, or acting things out, because it's my work. I do it easily,
Right.
And I've taught people creative writing. But I love, and there's some very simple, inexpensive, tools that can help you do that. I love the various storytelling decks, and in fact, I've brought them into my Making Writing Exciting workshops and classes a lot, and what's the other thing? Oh. And I've got this wonderful box of like big fat dice. What's the plural?
Yeah, I don't know.
But they've got words. It's for poetry, and they've got, that's what it's sold for. And they've got words on all 6 faces. And sometimes with the older, more verbal kids, or reading already, you can just you can all pick some words and then try to turn that in the beginning of a story, and or use it for the next pass along, the next sentence in a story. So yeah, using those tools is great. The other thing is, you can read like an opening paragraph from a book and go, so what would you have happen next? That's a way to use a prompt, and then you can read it and see what the author did, and the kids begin to get the idea that, well, that's what that author did. But I guess you can go different ways. Maybe they'll become famous fan fiction writers when they get older.
Right. Yes, and I do think fan fiction is a really great tool to help show that because I think sometimes we have this idea that you have to be a professional at whatever to be good enough to try, and I think that's potentially very dangerous way to think about the world. Doing things just for hobby seems to die out as we get older, and so encouraging kids to take something that someone else has done and shift it around to meet whatever needs they have in that moment, or wants.
Yeah.
I wish the story had happened this way. Well, it can. You just have to write it.
Yeah, that's so empowering. It's interesting. My 14-year-old goes on to Wattpad on her phone, and she reads fan fiction. And there's a little bit of letting go for me as like a parent to say, well, that's a lot of those stories are being written by, kids are maybe 5 years older, or 10 years older, even, and but still in their teens and or very early 20s, and they're maybe not editing. They don't have any censorship. So I have to talk about, well, what's, which ones are appropriate, or is that too sad, or whatever. But she finds a fan fiction piece that, where the author sort of calibrated to what she likes and really enjoys it. And they're and it's raw writing, which is wonderful too. It's like, yeah, no, it's still a good story, even if you notice they keep getting, the tense is wrong,
Right.
It's okay,
Right.
and because it's about getting it down, or writing down the bones is sort of that famous, there's some book by a woman who does workshops, is, get the bones of the story down is the idea. But, yeah, I like what you're saying. And I think, then I'm sure someone who's working as a nanny has some of the same challenges we all do as caregivers, and that you're not just, doing the fun, the entertaining, the exciting. You're also taking care of the basics. And there might be a younger one whose diaper needs changing, and it's kind of hard to think of whole cloth, a great new, adventure for the character while you're doing that. So
Right.
some aids are good. Yeah.
Yes, they can be. And sometimes, you're tired, and if your brain
Yeah.
isn't functioning on all cylinders, yeah, sometimes those creativity muscles get a little worn out. So I think it can be really good to help get it started with a tool, and you can also write down random words and draw
Yeah.
them out of a hat. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily
Or like
need.
different characters. Like,
Yeah.
what if Captain Underpants meets, Mickey Mouse? I don't know.
Yeah. What would that
Which
look like?
know about. Yeah.
I love that. Well, wonderful. Those were the majority of my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, I have to put a plug in, and,
Yes,
for,
please.
for reading out loud, it doesn't have to
Okay.
be Silent Lee and the Adventure of the Side Door Key, but if you have a book that you've read the review, or you've skimmed it, or the author, and it isn't going to go into some sort of waters the kid isn't ready for. They're not going to curse, they're not going to be all about teen angst over relationships or whatever. Then and it's like a good, comfy, safe read journey you can go on with the kids. I just think finding even 10 minutes on your way, somewhere, if you're on the subway, or take a lunch break, at the playground, and read a little. I mean, making that a ritual. It's harder to fight back for time for reading and for books in this era where there's so much entertainment that sort of, in order to get ad revenue, is just constantly being thrust at you and your kids. Right. But reading is, and it's just the magic of words. To read a scene out loud and then have your listeners imagine it. I mean, that is just helping them develop in their imagination and enriching their knowledge and their vocabulary in so many great ways that you're not going to get off of every all the other kind of media.
I completely agree. And also modeling reading yourself. I
Mm.
constantly have a book with me when I'm nannying. So if we're doing quiet time or I'm, waiting while they're practicing soccer or anything like that, then, I'm watching them, but I'm also reading a book instead of sitting there on my phone. I think modeling that behavior is really important. And there's so many good books in the
There
world.
are. And then can I put up just a quick plug in for what's called the middle school, or middle grade level books? Because, if the protagonists are, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, they're in that era where they're maybe on the way to high school. They're not there yet. Those books, are the classics of our kids' literature, actually. And
Yeah.
Harry Potter was just sort of a middle grade level when that first book was in that first book, so
Yes.
many wonderful classics in that genre. Although it's much smaller in the bookstore, and then it's not advertised as much as the YA books, but it's a great genre because you can read out those out loud to the whole any kid you're caring for.
Yes, yes. The Boxcar Children was one of my personal favorites.
Oh, fabulous! Yeah, yeah. I've
Yeah.
read out loud. I didn't read them as a kid, but I read them. I've read them a lot as a taken for to kids now. I wish I had. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm gonna plug the Babysitters Club because
Oh yeah.
I'm a nanny. That
Yeah.
obviously had an influence on me.
They're so well written and fun, and the characters are so likable. Yeah. No,
They
those are.
are, and they address some really like big issues in really wonderful ways, and it showed the importance of a supportive friend group, and those female friendships especially because I feel like in a lot of movies and TV there's this tendency to pit woman against woman
Yeah. Right.
in
Yeah.
this search for conflict. And they're certainly, the Babysitters Club fought within themselves, but it was always with a point, and both sides had valid arguments, and they worked it out together. So
Yeah, they did work it out, right? That's the point, and you can. Yeah.
yeah, so I love that plug for middle grade, or yeah, that idea that it doesn't have to be these high school stories to be interesting, and in fact, the late elementary years and then into middle school, finding books for that age I think is really important because it builds that foundation to go into high school as a lover of reading, which
Yeah.
having been a high school English teacher is so important.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. You've had that experience, and you know that there's some deficit there for a lot of kids nowadays.
There
Maybe
is.
I don't know if there was in the past, but you're trying to, and they may not be able to read, some of those classic difficult novels that are on the curriculum yet, but they can get there by reading, and anybody can dip into that literature. Even some of like real old classics like Harriet the Spy. I don't know if you, yeah,
Yes.
that's a wonderful adventure, and that still reads out loud well to kids today.
Yeah, it really does. And I know when I taught high school, my goal was because I had like kind of the drop everything and read. We had that school
Oh,
wide
great.
for
Yeah.
15 minutes. So I had that during one of my class periods. And my goal with that class was that every student find one book, that I help them find at least one book that they connected with throughout the year. And that can also include graphic novels. There are a lot of kids that are intimidated by a bunch of words on the page, but graphic novels use different parts of the brain. And
Mhm.
so exposing them, and there's some really, really wonderful graphic novels out there. The Prince and the Dressmaker is one that I just read that is very well done and appropriate for children. And and so in reading, those, they can build those literacy skills to be able to enjoy the classics if they so choose later on.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned graphic novels, and I haven't tried to write one, as they weren't around when I was a kid coming up. We read comic books, but I think the graphic novels fill that gap much better, because they really develop characters and stories, fully and kind of in the style of good novels, but so approachable. So yeah, many kids, there's going to be maybe a year or two where that's how they're going to get to the longer stories and engaging in books. Yeah, and I never thought about this, but the nanny can be the librarian, helping guide kids to find that one book they're going to love or the series and dive into.
Yes, yes, and I think that that's so important, and honoring when a child asks you to read something with them, or even not if they ask you, if they're reading something, picking it up and reading it yourself is such a simple way to honor that child's love of that book. And then you can talk about it together. And so I do encourage nannies to try out the books that their kiddos are interested in and reading, and buy them books or go find them at the library, or one of my favorite gifts when I am getting nanny kids gifts is books, age appropriate books.
Yeah. Well, if you're in a town where there's a good library, and a lot of town libraries are underutilized these days.
Mm-hmm.
And they may be not open every day, but when they're open and the librarian's there, no matter how stern and looking over their glasses they may seem, they probably can warm up to a nanny saying, "I've got kids this age and this age, and this is what they're reading now, and they have trouble with that. What could I bring home for them?" Yeah.
Yes, yes, and I think that, yeah, taking kids to the library and showing them how to go find their own books. If you're not as familiar, certainly having them ahead of time is great. But I do think that that's a great day adventure to, especially, those rainy days in the summer, hit us extra hard. And so making
and
that
there's
a library day.
some flexing of in the part of most libraries. They realize they're coming to realize that, like, you need a kids section where kids can be kids, and they don't always shush you rudely if the kids you're getting a little bit excited. They'll often have a corner with a couch and stuffies and some trains for the little ones or whatever. And I mean, so it's actually getting to be it is a really good outing. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're based in Boston, right?
Yeah, I'm actually outside of Boston, although my book is based in Boston, and I grew up there. But I'm in Amherst, which is outside of Boston. It's a college town, so I bring my younger daughter and her friends to the Amherst College Library sometimes too, and they don't so much find books they like, but they'll go exploring because it's a cool place. So in a rainy day when if it's a quiet time for the college and the students aren't really in there, I'll let them kind of create a little mayhem playing hide and seek in the stacks.
Yes, that sounds like a great day.
Of course, what happen is we get thrown out. So
right, exactly. At my college, I went to the University of Tennessee, and the night of Halloween, the theater group, all campus theater, would do a night of mayhem, and it was all things that could easily be cleaned up. We weren't, we didn't do any damage to any property or anything like that. But one thing that we would do is go set up like little scenes in the parts of the library that were not frequented very often, of like toys. So, dinosaurs fighting, and things like that.
That's great. Yeah.
So then when people did finally get there, they were like, "Oh, what is this?"
As you talk about creating scenes and your experience in theater, something I meant to mention is that, there are some wonderful scenes in children's books, and I've sometimes challenged my kids to act out a scene from like Silent Lee or whatever book we might be all sharing. So how would you play this out?
Yeah, I love that. Because then it also connects with kids that do really enjoy TV and movies. How how would you want to see this? How would you act it out if you were one of
And
the
maybe you pull
actors?
out your cell phone if they really think they've got something really fun, and you say, "Okay, run that through again, and I'll make a video of it." You can watch yourselves acting that out.
Yeah. Or there's also an app, or I'm sure there's several, but of stop motion.
Right.
And so they could do it, with their toys or Legos. We've done that before, creating little scenes with Legos. So that's a fun way to tell a story too, and it's very detail oriented. So that works, a different muscle too of thinking about, okay, they moved their arm this much in the last frame.
Hmm.
What do I need to do to tell the story on this really detailed level?
Well, and it's interesting if kids are engrossed in creating something, their tolerance for it and even love of detail is really impressive. Whereas if you're trying to get them to do something because you told them to, they get bored immediately. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of the opposite if it's their creation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that natural consequences of making a mistake, the stakes are really low there of if they try to move the little Legos through the scenes too quickly, then when they watch the product, the final take, it doesn't look right. And so then you can go back and try it again with finer movements between scenes.
I haven't tried that with my girls, but we do some flip books,
Oh,
which
that's
is
cool.
similar parameters, and you got to move things incrementally, page to page. In
Yeah.
fact, we elevated to the point where I ordered a little inexpensive LED light pad so that you can have the drawings, the drawing below, and then put the next one over and see really clearly how you're varying it. If you
Oh,
want to do the
that's
index cards and
cool.
then flip them later. So that can get to be quite a big deal, and quite a fine art if they like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Um, well, wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit more about Silently and the Adventure of the Side Door Key? Maybe just like a brief synopsis and then where people can find it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So silently, we meet her actually just as a crisis is unrolling. She's raised on Newbury Street in Boston, and by in an old brownstone by her great aunt Generous, who's a wonderful, kindly, lady, and be nice if she were, around to take care of your kids, right? But we learn that she isn't apparently died, and that Silent's mother, who probably works for the CIA and is
Ooh.
always away, and comes in and very sternly tells her the house has to be sold. It's all being packed up. Grab one memento and then go. She has to go live with these distant cousins who were distant in relationship, who live other place in Boston and who are really not very friendly, and make her live in the attic. I guess it's a little bit like Harry Potter underneath in his broom closet.
Yeah.
But so she's in a bad spot there. But the side door key opens a side door in the brownstone where she grew up, which leads to another version of Boston in a parallel world, and
Mm.
it's like what Boston was like turn of the century, like 100 plus years ago. And there's carriages, there's not TV and modern stuff, and it's also very magical. And she's at a magical school called the Girls Academy of Latin and Alchemy, and
Oh.
that school is actually set in a house where I used to go for the holidays to my great grandmother. So she lived in a house near the common that is now, I think, broken up into condos, and people don't live that way anymore. But this wonderful old mansion with hidden passages and stuff. So I put the school in that, and so Silent discovers through a message that her aunt gets to her through using magic that her aunt is not actually dead, but has been taken to a safe house by the CIA, and they're trying to figure out how to work the side door key and use the magic of the side worlds, for some nefarious government thing. But anyway, so she has to save her aunt and to defeat this plot, and that's
Yeah.
what propels the narrative. And they have quite an adventure. She meets a boy who she's at first very skeptical of, but ends up being very helpful, and they become friends. And as my 14-year-old says, she says, "I'm so glad you didn't do like the typical boyfriend girlfriend thing. They end up being friends, and it's not about stereotype
Romance.
romance. They're because they're focused on solving a problem, and they're both quirky individuals who have complementary skills.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I'm excited to get a copy. Where do I get one?
Oh, no, that's a good question. It's not in that many bookstores yet, but bookstores can order it if you just remember its name silently and the Adventure of the Side Door Key, and it's easy to get off of Amazon. In fact, there's a promotion for the Kindle ebook for I think it's for 99 cents right now,
Oh, wow.
and you can also just order the paperback. I read hard copies myself, but
Yeah.
that's also easily found on Amazon.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And I will include a link to
Oh,
the Amazon. So if you're listening and you're driving and you can't write down the name right now and you're worried you'll forget because you're full of thoughts of your children and all the things you need to do. I completely understand, listeners. But the link will be down in the show notes. So worry not. It's there for you. But that is so exciting. I'm very excited to read this story and learn more about Silent Lee.
well, thank you. And I've got a draft of the second book now, and I'm thinking about the third. So I would say I'm learning more about her too as we go. It's good fun.
Yeah, that's that's such a good point. It's so fun to interact with your own characters and kind of see where they pull you.
Right, exactly.
Well, great. So we end each episode with a funny, quirky story a from a kid, and Abby from the Nannyhood submitted this one. She said, I was ordering us dinner to be delivered, and after I ordered food for the boys, I asked for a salad for myself with no feta. After I hung up, the 12-year-old boy that I was with asked me what feta is, and I started describing the cheese. And then he had a look of recognition and said, oh, you mean fetish cheese, not feta. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Abby, for sharing that story. I love it. Fetish cheese.
An entrepreneur might run with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I can also understand why you wouldn't want fetish cheese on your salad.
Yeah, I'll leave that out of mine.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate you taking this time.
Thank you. It's been fun chatting.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you in a couple weeks. The Chronicles of Narnia is produced and hosted by Martha Reddick. Artwork by Noni Amadon. Theme music by Brad Kemp. Find him at secondbedroomstudio.com. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Chronicles of Narnia and on Twitter at Narnia Podcast. To contact us, email chroniclesofnarnia@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
This show has been brought to you by Machine Culture.